Hi, and welcome to Comics from the Ark. Devin and Jeff back for the week of December 11th, 2024. Uh, Anything new with the store lately, I guess, would be.
No, the only big things really is still trying to deal with the diamond shipment issues. At first, I thought, kind of maybe it was localized or something like that, but the more I've talked to some other people and things like that, it's more of like a national issue. It's like, well, about 2 weeks ago, we got maybe a quarter to a half of what was supposed to get to us, and then there was no shipment at all for an entire week, and then all of a sudden this week it's like everything hits. Like I had a ridiculous amount of independent books hit just out of nowhere, and it looks like there's going to be no shipment again for, I guess, technically the week after. With the way it's just like something has gone horribly wrong with their distribution at this point. Basically, I'm not sure what's going on with it, but it's kind of hit and miss on them at this point. At least with Lunar and Penguin at this point, we're still getting some pretty good flow with even with the holidays in play, but. I don't know. I think Diamond tried to change programs or something, but like even the invoices look really weird at this point. So, yeah.
How's Lunar doing?
They're getting stuff out-ish. We're small enough that it kind of the fact that we are so small plays into some of the shipping issues that happen with Lunar, and it has to do with deferred shipments and things like that. Whereas with Diamond, I mean, it's just this has literally been just the last like month right here. And to be honest, at first we talked about it. We were trying to figure out what was going on. It's like, okay, we're not seeing everything exactly where we should, stuff like that. Well, 2 months ago. Because you usually are ordered 2 months ahead, basically, on your previews. We missed our initial order cutoff that was supposed to be done, and ended up having to get a hold of customer service and say, okay, well, this is all of it, on Excel. Can we do something about it, get it fixed? And, so they got everything put in for us and stuff. But we were thinking it was probably, we were going to be a little bit behind because of our
Catching up,
there.
yeah.
Well, more specifically, yeah, instead of being a shipment to us for our weekly shipment, it'd be like a replenishment that we'd get a little later or something like that because we didn't meet the true cutoff. Apparently that wasn't it, and normal our stuff went in as normal, and pretty much countrywide this has turned into a problem. And the first time I started really kind of realizing it was kind of outside of local was I started seeing a few sponsored ads show up on the for those over 40 Facebook page. They were talking about, we're sorry because yet again we got no shipment from, and this is for last week. And then of course this week, all of them were like, okay, so we got everything now, give you an idea, just like out of nowhere. And we don't order even all of the image titles even close to it. And we still replaced 21 image titles on the racks this week.
Good Lord.
Because everything came in at once. I think the only things from Spawn that we didn't get replenishment for was like Violator and Salmon Twitch. Everything else, I mean, came in. Scorched, Gunslinger, Mainline.
I suppose when it comes to refreshing the rack, then it makes it easy. Like, well, these are all exactly 1 month old.
That's the thing, though. There's some of them that are under a month and some of them over a month. Because, like, if it's a 2-week book, it could be like 3 weeks in. But if it's a 1 month book, but it was 2 weeks ago that it got missed and we're just now getting it, all of a sudden, yes, it's new to shelves for pretty much everybody across the country. But in all actuality, the book had been technically released for 2 weeks.
Good grief.
So yeah, great things happening there. That being said, finally had a good replenishment on the independent books because lately it's been pretty much Marvel. DC's been, smattering the stuff up, but yet again, it just feels like DC's still trying to find their footing. They've pushed into this absolute stuff, and I think they're kind of testing the waters there because it's their version of the Ultimate Universe.
Yeah. Well, and I saw somewhere that they're going to start bringing out a couple more new titles now that they've kind of tested their footing.
Yeah, I don't know. I took a look at them, but of course, I'm the same person that looks at the Ultimate Universe and goes, If
it's not the main one, it doesn't count. We move on.
Well, even at that, I mean, just in general, the storyline usually doesn't track with me very well. It's more of a problem of the actual substance versus what it represents.
Well, I know that, I read Ultimate X-Men on the initial run, and after, at first it was like, okay, knowing what we know of the other universe, are we looking for this? Are we waiting for that? But some of the things that they did, it felt like they were changing for the sake of change, and it's supposed to be edgy now, just like they made Colossus gay and a mobster, and it was like, okay, not that one has an effect on the other, but it felt like they were just arbitrarily making changes just to shake things up.
And I'm trying to figure out where we ended up with a Steel version of Batman for Absolute Batman. You remember Steel, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't that the feel you get as far as just silhouette look with the big old hammer and everything?
Well, I know that they were pushing it as being he was more of a civil engineer and he didn't have mountains of money. He had to make his stuff, and he had to make his money and do these things.
But it's the hammer.
So I get that, he wasn't handed everything, and he had to either work for it or make it himself.
Yeah.
And I can appreciate that. However, you're right. It does kind of have a John Henry feel to it, because it's...
Well, even beyond that, I mean, let's take it out of the realm of, it looks basically like a Batman version of Steel. I'm pretty sure Steel was the guy's name, right? Mm-hmm. The replacement Superman.
One of the four.
Yep. And let's take a look at any usefulness of this thing whatsoever. You're going to end up cold cocking yourself with a handle that's 6 foot long so goddamn often. But it's yet
again. A hammer, or is it more of an axe? Because he took the bat off of his chest to put on it.
Well, yeah, I guess it kind of axe, but I mean, even at that, I mean, look at the length of that the hilt on that thing.
Well, could you imagine running around with a non-movable plate right on your chest and then trying to do all the twisting and turning that he would have to do fighting crime, and watch it out for sharp edges, mm-hmm. You don't want to reach across because you're mm-hmm. going to slice your arm.
Yeah, it's one of those things that it, looks good, in when it's inked down, but when you try to tell the story of it, it becomes a little bit more difficult.
It's the real life, it's always the difference between in on paper versus in actuality.
Yeah.
I have been part of a couple different online groups watching people debate and some people say, like absolute Batman seems to be the most decisive, divisive.
Oh yeah, it's all over the place.
Some people are like, "This is amazing, I love it." And other people are like, "This is
Yeah.
the dumbest goddamn thing."
Well, and the price is like all over the place on that one too.
But Absolute Wonder Woman has, I haven't seen a bad review of it,
Yeah.
and everybody seems just kind of like, "Oh, and there's Superman over there." And so,
Yeah, that one's kind of getting ignored for the most part, it seems like. And yet again, DC trotted out their normal Christmas special stuff. They, let's see, we had last week, there was stuff like you had the Batman smells Robin laid an egg Christmas special. And then, if I remember right, there's a couple other ones as well.
but they're also doing DC horror right now too. There's the anthology, and then DC horror presents Creature Commandos, which James Gunn is putting out the Creature Commandos cartoon movie. So
well, there's a lot of horror stuff really starting to catch on right now.
But it's amazing that we now, it used to be that before Thanksgiving or before Halloween, we would start seeing Christmas decorations, and now it's the reverse. We're almost to Christmas, and we still have Halloween type stuff.
Well,
I blame Tim Burton.
Well, no, some of it actually is the fact of, we're getting some kind of screwy on some of our releases. But even more so is, I don't know what it is about this year, but like even Black Friday, Small Business Saturday, stuff like that, the majority of money spent was done online. Like we weren't seeing the crowds. I mean, we were offering, pretty decent sales in store and everything like that, but it like well beyond what was offered, online, but it wasn't attracting the crowd because everybody can sit behind their computer, watch the Macy's Day Parade or whatever.
Well, and I know that there was pushback on Black Friday because on Black Friday in general, not this particular one, but like with Walmart and what have you, that everybody was starting to get up in arms about how places were handling Black Friday. And so now I know like Walmart and Target were doing specials before Black Friday and kind of diluting it out and having a month of specials so that you didn't have this big, deep impact of everybody shopping at once. And I kind of wonder if that has changed how people approach it because, it's like, okay.
Well, if it did, it affected beyond just the Black Friday scenario because it also affected into Small Business Saturday stuff as well. Because normally that Saturday, we get really, really good foot traffic, if nothing else. Even if we don't have a crap ton of sales, we get a lot of people through. And it was, I would say at best half of what last year was as far as total people. So, but it's kind of crazy.
I think part of it is a certain mindset has changed, and people are not as, I don't want to say motivated, but they aren't kicked into gear. They don't have that switch thrown where they're in a frantic, mindset.
Yeah. Well, the big thing that you see though is, and this might be part of it, is we're only seeing the beginning versions of it at this point, is in general. Like if we were just to look at it weekend by weekend, since the beginning of roughly the beginning of November, we've actually had a nice bump, all the way through, and it's maintained all the way through. Normally, I have a much larger bump on, Black Friday and stuff, but it was still got that bump at the beginning of November, and it's still holding. The interesting side of that is 0%. It seems like of that bump is cash sales. It's all credit card runs, and my gut tells me it's people betting on the economy. the gas prices are going to be coming down in 90 days or 180 days or something. So they're willing to carry that credit at this point because they see a better something or whatever. Whereas on the other side of the house, you have people that have just stopped spending altogether because they feel that, pretty much this is the end of the American economy going forward. And so they're doing everything they can to save and conserve and not be in debt. And then there's, of course, the third one, which thinks the same exact thing, but goes, you know what? Well, if that happens, the banks are going down, so my credit card doesn't matter anyway.
Or there is the option that people still haven't quite recovered from, financial duress and are charging because they don't want to have a Christmas without gifts. And so
this isn't like Christmas stuff that I'm seeing. This is. It's more of a personal durable goods scenario. It's and if you listen to the conversations, people are buying stuff for themselves. And so like I said, there seems to be two distinct outlooks happening, but it's managed to cause a bump in business in general because even though half the country has decided to spend more, it's the half the country that usually will go to the small towns anyway. So it's a very interesting dichotomy starting to happen there. And your online sales, I think, being bumped as far as they were over that weekend also shows where a lot of people from the other side of the house of not wanting to, trust in the way things are going, but don't want to trust it. They decided that staying home was in their best interest because how can they trust anything at this point in their lives, and so they get themselves into that spiral.
Gotcha.
And it goes all over the place, and there's a lot of interesting political science to this one, I'm sure too, that can play directly into economic science, to be quite honest.
Oh, I'm sure.
It's such a unique scenario that regardless of what side you fall on, watching it from my standpoint of a small business owner is very interesting, because I hear everything and everybody come in, and mostly all I do is nod, smile, because I don't want to get anybody really too ruffled, and so, I'm not gonna.
Unless it's me.
Yeah, not gonna be an ass about it, basically. But at the same time, it's interesting to hear all the different outtakes, I've had a couple of the people come in that did the shaved head thing. It was kind of interesting.
The shaved head thing?
Basically, it is and I know I'm going to get this wrong and probably get yelled at in the comments for it, but if I understand properly, it is if men are going to not take the time to really take a look at what they're voting in and blah, 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 then we're not going to give you something pleasant to look at. And so, shaving their heads.
So
women specifically. Yeah. It's kind of a Sinead O'Connor type situation. Sinead O'Connor, sorry. Kind of that type situation, using it as a protest form.
Huh. I haven't seen or heard of that.
I watch a lot of YouTube. So
that's the problem.
Yeah.
So, okay.
But anyway, point is, it's going to be interesting to see what it does to the overall comic book market in general. I know it's done some unique things with the trading card market. For example, for months, Pokemon has just been dead. And then out of nowhere, going into the holiday season, and last holiday season wasn't exactly the same way or anything. And, maybe it's just unique to each year. But all of a sudden, Pokemon can't you can't find it, you can't touch it. It's just, and everybody's buying it everywhere they find it. So it's kind of interesting.
Remind me of that later, because I had worked the craft show in Atlantic last weekend, and I actually had a person come up and talk to me about Pokemon cards.
Yeah. Oh, actually, yeah. So it's interesting to see what's flipping back around, and a lot of it I think has to do not only with nostalgia, but now people are allowing for a nostalgia without a durable use. Granted, Pokemon should be a durable use because it's a game, right? But when you take a look at it versus, for example, Magic the Gathering, Magic, you're looking at, collect only and don't play, maybe less than 10% of it. Whereas, 80 to 90% of your Pokemon, people are collectors that don't play. Like, most people don't know how to play that game, I don't think.
I know my son was that way.
Mm-hmm. My kids are that way. So, I've got, kids ranging all the way from 21 to 30. And let me tell you, it's every one of them collected, never learned the game.
Maybe it's one of those things where this Christmas people are trying to, I don't want to say center themselves, but maybe try to get back to basics or get back to a comfortable feeling. And that's why we're having this influx of Pokemon or other non-necessity physical items.
Well, a combination of that and the Pokemon land in the right territory. It's the same reason you're seeing a lot of the Nicktoons start kicking up right about now. Like honestly, a lot of those are getting real popular currently.
Well, and you and I have discussed how the market is shifting from He-Man and Transformers, and now we're starting to get into the era of Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers, and that would then include our Nicktoons.
Well, it's going to start getting into late 90s, early 2000s at this point, and I kind of wonder if some of it doesn't move a little bit quicker at times based on a couple different factors. Number one, it feels like people are wanting to reach back to their childhood a lot sooner than before. Before, the old midlife crisis hit you, 40s or so, somewhere in there.
Right.
And now people are midlife crisising at 30, even though they're going to live to 90. It's like, okay, you're 30.
Feed yourself.
Yeah. But at the same time, they're having what appears to them, or in a lot of cases is actually happening. There's a little bit more disposable income than there was to the last group that was buying their childhood. And a lot of that has to do with, the choice of renting over owning. You own and you start losing money a lot quicker, to repairs and this and that.
Or a lot of people now are choosing not to have children.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be a generational thing, because, it used to be that was what you aimed for, was you were going to
got married, have kids.
And now we've slowly got to the point where if you don't want to have kids, don't have kids, and people are embracing that. And then obviously when you don't have kids, you're going to have a lot more disposable income, and then you can do the things that you want to do.
No, and I think this gets into, more of the, and it can get into a lot of crazy debates into things having to do with, the, minimum wage and everything else, because a family with no kids can most definitely get by on a much lower minimum wage than a family with kids. But how dare you consider that? I mean, there's just so many crazy sides that can come into that. But at the end of the day, even the people that are, the lower income or even up into the higher income, they're still picking, the collectible market as kind of a good place to land in.
Well, and it's a personal comfort, and people are now getting to the point where they just want to wrap themselves up in a warm, fuzzy feeling. And if this is what it's going to make for them to feel better, they're going to embrace that because it's going to be their lifeline.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and not only that, but even if it isn't their lifeline, at least it's something they can go in a room and look at or remember a simpler time.
Right.
And that's really the key to all of this. And it's why that it used to be at, somewhere in the 50s is when, when the generation had turned, 50s to 60s, you'd start seeing huge spikes in prices, but now it's just happening a lot quicker. And, like I said, I don't know if that's based on mental outlook or, just the speed of the world of, like Facebook and everything or
what changes or.
Well, I mean, think about how often you open Facebook and, granted, I know I got told this for only over 40, but that everything out there has social engineering built in it to be able to have an algorithm to show you things to make you nostalgic. So if you're constantly having the nostalgia of your childhood thrown in your face, even 10 years after your childhood, you're going to get to where you want that more sooner than if you didn't really think about it until you got to the point where, oh man, I miss being able to blah, And so is there something to be said that, like that these social websites and stuff aren't pushing that nostalgia faster?
Possibly.
So.
Well, speaking of nostalgia, I know what your pick for the week is.
Mm-hmm. We did Grommets again. This week was kind of like just kind of getting everything prepped for the final 7 of 7 that's coming out next. Ramifications of the party, basically, with the jocks basically showing up and just going, just completely off on them, and this is the rest of the kind of the beatings that took place and things like that.
Right.
And it's the definitive, and yet again, they do things that make you remember things, like they show like one of the first hits that happens in this party. And granted, it didn't happen to me in a house or something. We were out. Oh God, I think we were out in Lake Guernsey or something. Out in Wyoming, and because I out there at that point. And there was 2 parties going on. You had my high school and our rival high school. Relatively not too far apart from each other, having 2 separate parties. And this is back in the day when let me shake my cane while I'm at it here. But where the rivalry was solid. It was
right. Us versus them.
Oh, it was bad. And this is back when I'm 6'1". I soaking wet. I weigh like $135. I look like. I look like basically, bone skin, and that's about the extent of it. I was a long distance runner. I was a wrestler. I didn't really have any meat on me whatsoever. But I played all the sports, and did all that stuff. Well, the other party had their fullback, and I still remember this guy, Jeff Fuller. God.
You're watching this, Jeff.
Yeah, Jeff. Yeah, if you're out there, man, sometime I'd like to go ahead and finish this up, and we'll go toe to toe and shake hands afterwards, man. But No, he comes up. He's part of a group that comes over, and I ended up. I don't remember what all the hell happened, but it just like I didn't even say anything. It went from 0 to why is that fist coming at me like instantaneously almost. It was like the sight of my nerdy little butt just pissed him off or something. And so I take this like brutal uppercut. I when it was all said and done, I ended up getting 10 stitches in my lip from it because it sliced my lip almost all the way up to my nose. Um, and I spun just a little bit and staggered and stood up and turned around. And I just kind of standing there staring at him, and our quarterback at the time, and I think this is the one point where I finally got a little bit of clout with a few people. Is the fact I just stood there. I was like, it's like it was that like it was kind of like Encino Man. Remember that the new kid took it. It was like one of those type moments. And I remember Corey just turning on Jeff at that point. He's just like, you picked the smallest guy. That was wrong. That was the wrong thing to do here, man. Get ready type thing. And there was just, and that same feel happens in this book, where you got, the skinny little scrawny kids, are definitively overpowered on a regular basis. But at the same time, you learn how to take a hit because, we were skateboarders. Hell, we ate more asphalt than anything else, getting punched, that was nothing. So it made for a unique dichotomy in your mind how you were to deal with things. And eventually my parents will watch this, and when they do, this is what I'm talking about is when I told you I got hit in the face with the water ski. So because yet again you didn't. I could have went home and I could have been like, oh, blah, blah, blah. It was this person, it turned into this huge freaking stupid deal. But you know what? It wasn't worth it. At the end of the day, a few people got beat up. I got some stitches. I learned some life lessons out of it and moved on.
Right. Which is not exactly how things would play out nowadays.
It's not. And yet again, that going back to Grommets, that's exactly what they're doing here. And at the end of this issue, they specifically do that. They go to the kids and they're like, what happened? And they don't cover for anybody, but they do not. They make sure no information is given that
incriminate.
Well, not even just incriminate, but basically end somebody. They recognize it for what it is. They recognize that the person is going to be dealt with on a social level at a later time, because at the party you could see where the friends were kind of turning on the one kid that was taking it too far and everything like that. So there's going to be a social construct built to deal with his stepping out of line at that point.
You party fouled. You want to
you don't have to bring the cops in. It's going to be taken care of. It's kind of like in the military. Bar of soap in the old sock will do it all day long.
Or have a towel party.
Yeah, and it's the same concept here. They chose not to say who, where, when, how, because they knew things would take care of itself.
Back when there was honor among thieves.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, there was no honor there. It's just, at the same time, I also knew that from what I remember from that night, because of a mixture of, number one, definitively drunk, and number two, I still remember that hit. That's why I'm like, dude, you got to go toe to toe with me one time, because you got to give me a chance, man. Because nobody let me engage you after that, And so to this day, that kind of bothers me a little bit, And it's not that I backed down; it's that I never got a chance,
closure.
Yeah, right? Sounds messed up, but whatever. But yeah. So they're doing the same thing here, and I'm looking at these pictures going through here. I'm like, oh God, I remember looking like that a couple times, and
Just because something reminds you of your youth doesn't necessarily mean that it was a good time of your youth.
Oh yeah, like the running from the cops and just the everything. Going to the hospital and then having to explain to your parents why you're at the hospital. It's like, well,
And then, and especially if you're trying to, well, I'm not going to rent them out. So.
Yeah. Well, and damn good and well, because of where we are today, that while at the time we thought we were, okay, they're going to let me get away with it, sweet. That really what they're doing is like, what did that little son of a bitch hiding? And because they knew what was going on.
They give you enough rope to hang yourself.
Yeah. So that's what I did, was kind of memory lane again, and yet again, like you said, it doesn't have to be a good memory, but sometimes it still elicits that Grommets yet again. Elicits that core memory of some kind. It's always something, whether it be when we were riding the skateboards down the overpass, which was very similar to them in the parking garage. The fight scenes in this were very similar to our time at Lake Guernsey. It's just like, it's over and over again.
But ultimately, it's what made you you. So then it makes it important.
Yeah. Well, but what's interesting about it is, the more I read reviews about the series in general, everybody had these experiences of some kind.
Right.
Well, there's always some version of it there, and especially if you were anywhere in the skate world whatsoever, you lived pretty much everything they've talked about here, because most of us were skinny little bastards. We were.
Well, that's because you were out doing something.
Yeah. But we could definitively get our asses kicked pretty handily.
But it's like Matt Going, who, when he made Comic Book Guy for The Simpsons, he had so many people like, I didn't know you knew the comic book store guy from my hometown.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't. It's the same person. It's sometimes
Apu is the same way.
Sometimes stereotypes have a basis which kind of gives a little bit of validity.
Well, and it's not even just a stereotype. It's the weirdness of even the trajectory being almost the same.
You definitely break the mold of comic book store owner.
But at the same time, when you look at trajectory of the storyline, even versus most people, we went through the same. It was the same thing. You did this, then you did this, then you did this, then you did. It was in that specific order, and you could say, okay, step 4 was, oh yeah, that's where I got my ass kicked.
It's like stages of grief, but
Yeah, except for it's the stages of going through high school. And I think that Grommets does a great job capturing, like I said. I don't think it's just the skater community. I think there's a larger community that it does capture the overall feel for it, because I think it pulls in a little bit of that kind of nerd feel, because it's anybody that was kind of looked down on and shunned for what they enjoyed doing.
An outcast.
Not just an outcast. It's a special kind of outcast. It was an outcast that wasn't outcast by themselves, but was outcast as a group.
Genre.
Yeah, like you always had the one kid that got shoved in the corner. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, that would bring back my memory.
Yeah, so you had that, but then you also had the outcasts that were shunned as a group. Your skaters were shunned as a group. Your D&D nerds were shunned as a group. Because while they shunned the overall D&D or skating, the fact that you did it together kept you as a group, even as you were being pushed out of society.
Right. Fair to say.
So it was a weird thing for me to kind of yet again live through. So anyway, on with yours.
Fair enough. I picked up the new Laura Kinney Wolverine title. Once again, X-23, Laura, or all new Wolverine, however you think of her, has her own book. This is after the island has fallen. Due to the events that happen in NYX, you could argue that this takes place prior to like issue 3 or 4 of that run because of situational is all I'll call it. There are things that happen in here that wouldn't have happened if it chronologically happened after the latest issue of NYX. So that said, we already have a little bit of a continuity problem.
Yeah.
There was also an issue where Laura was being crushed, and she said, even with the adamantium in my bones, I feel like I'm being crushed.
Well,
the problem is that
your nerves are outside your bones, so...
Well, and the other thing is that as far as I know, and I even Googled it before I talked about it here, she doesn't have adamantium bones, just her claws. Unlike Logan, she has just normal bones, So she can swim and she can move faster, but she's not as durable.
Okay.
So here we are having a book, issue number 1, and they're already making that kind of mistake. Now then, back in the old days, no prize was, a badge of honor, but you could write in. If you caught a mistake like that, you could try to explain it away on behalf of the writers, and then, they would send you an empty envelope and say, congratulations, you got your no prize. I could, you could argue that, but, with the last time she died during the island, when they brought her back, they put adamantium in because they did all sorts of modifications each and every time people got resurrected. You could put in a request that next time you resurrected me, give me a different color hair, get rid of my stutter, bring back my hand or leg.
Or have it be part of a future storyline where, this was kind of she slipped and then she doesn't really bring it up again, but she was actually given this by a villainous side that she ends up turning toward at some point. This was a gift, and the favor owed is called upon at some point.
Possibly. Either option would be great.
Kind of like an apocalypse type thing.
Right. That's actually where I was thinking. So, I mean, right out of the gate, we had that going against it, and it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. But ultimately, the premise of this title is that Laura is going to be there for mutants that need some type of assistance. Basically, she's like the mutant A-team. If you're in trouble and if you can hire her, she's there to help. But in this case, she's not taking money. She just wants to make sure that everybody's protected. So we have an adventure where she's trying to rescue a kidnapped mutant, and she's driven by the fact that it mirrored her youth, and she didn't want people to have to go through the same type of problem.
Yeah.
So the art for it, it kind of feels like Humberto Ramos, who does Spider-Man. It's kind of a stylized art. There are some very sharp lines and angles that humans don't normally have at the waistline. So, it
kind of like almost a life feel to it, or cause like where you did that, is you headed down toward the triangle foot.
It's like something in between that and Kirby. Kirby didn't necessarily do proportions correctly, but he was a master at doing depth, but doing it fast. He was putting out several books, and he would sit down and go,
kind of one of those phenomenal cosmic chest, itty bitty lower body.
Right. Well, in this particular case, there was a scene where, she was reaching and her body came down, and the moment you got to her hips, immediately went back out. It was almost like a true hourglass. There was a very sharp point at which everything went back out. And so it was a little jarring. It's definitely a stylized art. If you're familiar with Humberto on Spider-Man, you know what I'm talking about. There's just scenes where they do wonderful expressions, but either the proportions or the way the body moves or the angles don't quite line up correctly. This is not a master class of the anatomy. It's more of a quick, fluid movement thing.
Yeah, and everybody seems to have their own feel on all of the different, because, like, for myself, for example, I don't like some of that newer stuff like that, nor do I like Peach Momoko and the chibi look or any of that. But I will lean into, like, some old John or, either John, actually, if you want to get technical, the artwork they produce, because while it wasn't the cleanest of artwork, it was exactly what it needed to be for the tales that were being told, aka, one side with your Grim Jack and your, kind of your Demon Hunter and your pan-dimensional, so you're able to have somebody that could make you feel like you were jumping dimensions by changing their art just slightly. And then on the other side, you had, like Next Men and things like that, especially, leading into your Hellboy and all that. So,
right.
Which you definitively don't like, and you're far more into, like, the Lee stuff, if I remember right.
Yes, but I will say, like with Mike Mignola, as an example, if it's his work, like if it's with Hellboy, that's how Hellboy looks. Yeah. That's just the way it is. That's it. And I'm fine with it. Mm-hmm. However, his version of Batman in Cosmic Odyssey was painful to look at. So something that someone has already done before, and we have great examples of how they should look. Mm-hmm. And then you go to this very stylized art. That's where I have the transition problem. If it's an original art, like if they created some supernatural bounty hunter detective, no, well, that whatever said, you move Ostrander forward into his more mainline books. He brought that same art style with, or that same feel with, right,
and it didn't matter though, But at the same time, for you, it is Mike moved forward with his stuff. Into some of the more mainstream, it didn't work for you at all.
Right.
Yeah, and I think the big thing for me, what I look at is, I like the cartoony, like your Anagones, like
the Brit Tim.
Anagones, Sierra.
Oh, yeah.
I can never pronounce his name, but what I'm talking about. From Mad, did all that fun stuff. But yeah, he does Gru and all that. Very, very cartoony look. And so I completely dig that. But I've always dug what he did, because I started reading his stuff clear back in Mad.
Right. And I'm fine with Gru looking like that. Mm-hmm. Now then, if that same artist turned around and did an X-Men book and drew everyone in that style, that's where I have the problem. It's...
But that had he went over to any of those books like X-Men, he would have taken that exact style into it.
That's what I'm saying. I'm not necessarily bashing the art style in and of itself. I just feel like they're better style. Like, if it's part of your story, go with it. Lean into it. But we've had so many examples of classic superhero art that I really can't go for a super stylized.
But what's considered classic though? Because we bitch about Liefeld all the time and stuff. But okay, if we start back in the '60s with our initial artworks, with your Leeds, your Kirby's, and all that stuff, And then you move that forward up to like your Claremonts and stuff like that. You know, at what point of changing the overall look is it considered stylized? Because, like I said, all of a sudden when you go from Claremont to Liefeld, it becomes stylized. But although Claremont is substantially different than the original works from Lee in the '60s.
Well, most of the time when I refer to stylized, I am more referring to the art. And
But
I'm not going to get sucked into one of your arguments where I can't defend my thought. But
well, no, it's not defend your thought of it. How much of a change makes it stylized versus a personal touch?
I guess there are times where you can tell if someone had professional lessons in art where they discuss body proportion and the anatomy, muscle build, structure, and all of that. And we've gotten into an era now where it's more, I don't want to say interpretive, but it's we don't follow those old rules as rigidly. And so,
Yeah.
There are sharper angles or everything is rounded, the person may not be exactly 7 heads tall, the anatomy may be lacking definition, and it's more of a, what can I do quickly and put it out? I can't point at 2 pictures and say, here's what's right and here's what's wrong.
Do you think that has anything to do with digital versus paper?
It might make it a little bit easier to do since we're doing a lot of digital, but I also think that we're starting to get away from the old school. You go to art school, you hone your craft, and you start off with these other projects and work up. And now it's more of we've gotten away from the edginess of the '90s, which thank God.
Well,
but I think that they are outsourcing a lot of the art chores, and some of it may actually be regional. Like, I know that we're doing a lot of stuff out of South America and Europe now, and they have a different style about them.
Well, I think the bigger problem is this. Because I've seen this in a couple books where I kind of suspected this. I can't guarantee this is what's happening, but it feels this way. A lot of times you have a few different versions of the character drawn, right?
Right.
Now, if you are pulling those into the frames and stuff like that in digital format, the current level of technology that we're sitting at with just our basic Photoshop, you can start spinning something and it'll render it for you. So, I mean, then this is where my question comes in is, do you think there's a laziness setting in to them using the technology to be able to not draw as much versus before, where when they were putting pen to paper and they had to look at that piece of paper afterwards and feel good about it? Now they're looking at a screen and it's never actually what it's going to look like.
I hadn't given it much thought, but I still think that they are doing this by hand, but I think we're now under time constraints and we are no longer as concerned with the technical details versus conveying a feeling or a sense of urgency.
The time constraints have always been there. And before and when you say you're doing it by hand, that's exactly what I'm getting at is they're doing it by hand, but then they can cut and paste pieces.
Right. Well, but if you go far enough back, titles used to be bi-monthly. All of them. And then when they switched to monthly, I know that a lot of times they would have art that had been commissioned and paid for and then kept in a drawer in case someone was falling behind schedule, and then you had a filler piece,
Well, and you know where a lot of that bi-monthly came from, right? It wasn't the artists or the writers.
Was it because at the time Marvel could only publish X amount of titles and it was being done through DC?
Well, kind of yes, and even if you look at it from DC's standpoint, all right, your production capability was nowhere at the level where we are now, of course. So they were being limited by not only their ability to produce mass quantities like that, but then to distribute it, before a time of air transport and things like that being a regular thing. It was having to be put on a truck, and then that truck to a distribution center to be split off into other trucks, to be split off into other trucks. And so it ended up being a far longer process to get the book done.
But a lot of times, a lot of the artists also lived in New York, and so you could have a courier taking it to the building, or you had instances where the artists or writers would actually.
Oh no, I'm talking after the artist gets it to the company.
Okay.
Yeah, the time it takes to once the book is starting to be printed.
Okay.
That lead time was way bigger.
Right. Because again, the limitations of the technology at the time.
Yep.
But
and I think your artists were actually probably putting out far more than the artists of today when it was all said and done. And they were doing it by hand on paper, and it was done on those cell sheets. And that was basically the bottom line of it was, I think, to be quite honest, I think a lot of the artists today have become quite lazy. I think a great example of that would be Land.
Land is the one that everybody goes with, and not without reason. He has, I have a couple of cartoon characters that I draw, and I always tend to draw the same pose, the same expression, and what have you. And that's more out of either muscle memory or the fact that I never bothered trying to approach this character from a different angle.
Yeah.
My 5-year-old, he draws all of his superheroes the same way, legs, arms straight out, and doing stuff. Very rarely is someone doing anything, like hand up here or kicking. But that's because he hasn't expanded that yet. Yeah. And I think that Greg Land has gotten to the point where he draws the same woman with the same pose.
That's the problem. Yep.
Frank Cho is an amazing artist and has such ability, but most of his women look like Jen from Liberty Meadows.
Yeah.
Unless he does something different and to make them distinct. I know that it probably takes him longer to do it, but if he sits down and kicks out a sketch of a woman, they all look like Jen from Liberty Meadows with just different hair. And it's either Jen or Brandy, and he had two defaults, and those were his women.
Yeah.
And so there is something to be said about having a muscle memory for some of this, but then do you have the ability, if you have to slow down or, push out your deadline, to draw it differently? And I don't think Greg Land quite has that ability anymore. Whereas I know Frank Cho can.
Well, yeah. And like I said, what I'm looking at is, and I'll always probably go back to Kirby and Lee as the two examples on this one. In the fact that the sheer amount that they put out on a monthly basis for decades, and you can't tell me that with the plethora of artists that we have now, there's not one of them that can produce like that, at that level, and so what that yet again is telling me is the artist pool is lazy.
Maybe not so much lazy, but I think that there's a certain mindset that people don't have anymore.
Yeah.
The baby boomers have been called the greatest generation because they've struggled and worked and had to hustle to make things meet. And now that we're in a society where you don't necessarily have to work as long of hours as, grueling a schedule, we've come complacent. Imagine what would happen if they put forth a little more effort to do some of these. John Byrne, for example, was doing Marvel Team Up
Yeah.
and Iron Fist and X-Men all at the same time, didn't he?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, and here's the thing, and you bring up a real valid point. Is I mean, it's the same concept as today, the weakest of society would never get eaten by the saber tooth. It's that same concept is happening across the board on everything, and I think that's the same thing probably happening here as well. Is when there's no reward for excelling and everybody that just does a mediocre job gets the same celebration, what's the point in being the next Stan Lee or the next Frank Miller or or Jack Kirby? There's no motivation to get there.
Well, I think part of it is that the comic industry in and of itself can't pay, competitively like they could back in the day. I think that with the overhead, what it is, I think part of the reason why we're outsourcing to other countries is an effort to save money. Because if you have the ability to draw nowadays, you could easily work at an advertising firm or any number of places.
Again, I go back to exactly what I was saying. Those guys didn't make peanuts when they were starting. Hell, it was decades before Stan Lee, even Stan Lee and Jack Kirby got anything worthwhile out of the comic world. And so yet again, it's where are the ones that have the dedication that are willing to be the next icons, that have the ability to evolve their art form and evolve their storytelling. Because if you look at your classical, gold and silver and bronze age artists, they didn't just stagnate at what they were drawing at that point. They continued to evolve as artists and become even better over time.
Kurt Swan being a good example of that. He was on Superman for a number of years, and he was the Superman artist. But when he started off, Superman had a way more blocky look. He always had the broad chest, but when Kurt Swan started, there wasn't much of a curve inside.
Yeah.
He was just kind of a barrel body, and over time he did adapt that a little bit. The chest shrunk just a little bit so that the proportions kind of averaged out better.
To where it felt better, yeah.
Right. And so even though he was considered the epitome of Superman art, he kept changing his style up and through the mid 80s even, and so...
And it was probably from talking to fans and things like that were giving him input, and then him going...
contemporaries, doing, what they're doing, and they're like, well, that's an excellent image of something, and maybe I should look at how I'm doing mine.
Exactly.
But I think that everybody is just kind of in a rush. It's like, okay, I've done my part, now pay me, and I'm going to kick back and relax. I think everybody's rushing or slopping or whatever.
They're in it for the wrong reason is the problem then, because if you showing up to your job isn't kicking back and relaxing, and you're in an entertainment industry field, you might want to reevaluate what you're doing, because unless you love what you're doing, you're not going to be able to portray that in these books.
Right. But just because you do have the love for it doesn't necessarily translate to talent either. I love comic books, but I don't think that I can sit down.
Yeah, but having the combination of it is really what's needed. And instead of, outsourcing or hiring 600 different artists and hope that something works, find the good ones and make them and make them big, make them something wonderful. And then, when you get them to that level, if they continue to have the output needed, continue to pay them for that output, because all that money that's being spent on tariffs, the labor there, then having everything sent back and forth, having the offices set up there and here and all that. If you took all that and you put it toward one really good artist, you'd probably be in a lot better shape.
Well, and I remember back in the 80s, they had the Marvel tryout book, and it was a larger thing, and it was a few dollars at a time when a comic book was 40 to 60 cents. And what it was is it had storyboards in there and the blocked off pages, and they wanted you to draw, and not just draw a stagnant person, but they wanted you to draw main characters, side characters, background, and show what you're capable of, and then you can submit it. And with technology nowadays, you have the ability to download everything to your tablet and take it to a convention and go, this is what I can do. You don't have to go through all this other stuff. Why aren't we getting the people out there trying out?
Because yet again, the manipulation on a tablet or on a computer is fairly easy. Somebody with almost no talent at all can produce an absolutely gorgeous piece of art with very little work going through Photoshop and all this stuff. If somebody produces it on a tablet, great. You can manipulate it to this point, through fine detailing, or hell, you type a paragraph into the computer anymore, you can have a picture produced, And so
I do. We're gonna switch over to that.
Well, I mean, it's
a valid point. Don't get me wrong.
Well, it's an inevitability here. Whereas if somebody shows up and they've got some no shit paper that they have drawn on, that's going to be the artist that you're going to want to cultivate, because they show the talent when they can't make a mistake.
Well, and again, with music and art and anything that people go out and appreciate, we don't know what we want until we see it. And that's part of the reason why Hollywood is having such a hard time coming up with original ideas. Is we've gotten to the point where not everything has been seen or done, but we're starting to lose some of that creativity.
Well, The Simpsons did it.
Yeah. Simpsons foretold that, But the every complaint about these TV shows suck, or the only movies that do well anymore are sequels or franchises, and somewhere along the way we have fallen into the path of least resistance, and we are just trying to do the bare minimal that we can walk away from and be happy with.
That's my exact point. Why do we have to be okay with that?
But the problem is that until someone stands up and says, I want to do this and hire me to do this for you, the pride in one's work is starting to get less and less frequent. People are like, okay, well, not my best work, but I got the deadline done. Here you go. And I know that there are people still putting out stuff, and it's usually the people who are putting out their first work and are trying to get into the industry. Those are the people trying the hardest. Well, and between the trees where nobody sees. I couldn't tell you what all that person had done prior, but I guarantee you that they're going to have a lot more options now after that story.
Oh, yeah.
And it was such a good story. It was well written. It was well drawn. And it had an interesting premise. And, that's why it took off the way that it did, is because when was the last time that we had a series where people had talent? The writer and the artist had talent, and it was a fresh idea, and it was well executed.
Well, it happens a lot, but not much in Marvel or DC, because neither of them are willing yet again to cultivate a
novice.
Yeah, a novice talent. Because take a look at Image had the 8 billion genes.
Right.
And that was an absolutely amazing concept. And then where that got real interesting was the artwork in it, where you had two completely different art forms being drawn by that person. Because the genie had one look, and all the characters had a secondary look.
Right.
So yet again, I mean, that's showcasing ability of the artist, but why are they being stuck on a book here and there, and why haven't they been showcased further at this point? Same thing with Beneath the Trees artists, things like that. There's a lot of the guys like Roman. I love his artwork for like Rick and Morty. Why can't we get some more? Why can't we get him into some other comics and stuff?
Well, I look at some of the people who have done big events at Marvel. You have Bendis, you had Matt Fraction, you had all these writers who were then given highly profiled task, and then more often than not, it's failed, and then they disappear and they go off to independent land. It's like they failed upward to the point where they were given the pinnacle job is doing this year's event, and when it didn't go over well, then it's like, well, I'm sorry, we're gonna have to part ways. I mean, look at Jonathan Hickman. Everybody was gushing about what he had done on the mutant titles, and then he goes off and he does the Gods miniseries.
Yeah.
And I've never heard one good word about it, and it's quietly ended, and no one made a big ta-da, like, hey, this is the last issue and all this is coming to a point. No one cared. And where's Jonathan Hickman now? And I know that he's doing stuff, but there's not as much of a, hey, everybody, Jonathan Hickman's here and he's doing this thing. No, because after Gods tanked, some of his value diminished.
But you can't say that is what happens to everybody, though.
No, but I'm saying
let's take a look at yet again. We're going to go back to Lightfield. Things like, I don't know, Brigade. What else was there from that time period? Hardcore, wasn't that one of his nightmares?
Youngblood,
that was definitely one of his nightmares. And then at the same time, when you had him,
Volume 2 of Captain America.
Yeah. At the same time, when you had him doing all those that horrible crap for Image, McFarlane was doing the same thing. They were throwing everything at the freaking wall, and it was like failure after failure after failure. Yet they're still regarded some of the best. So you can't say it's just because of a failed series, because let me tell you, Liefeld and McFarlane failed a crap ton of series during that.
But that was also at a point where it was more about, and this is not meant to be a pun, but it was more about the image. Liefeld had done a Levi's 501 Blue Jean commercial where he was drawing his schlock and talking about how great he is. He sucked. He's always sucked, and I don't care who said otherwise. But he carried himself like he was a rock star, and it's like in high school. If you acted and believed that you were cool, it translated into success. And for the people who were like, I couldn't do that, they didn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I mean, when you've got that many failures going on under you can't just say that Gods was the thing.
No, and I know it's what it sounded like, but what I'm saying is that, after you take a couple of hits, then all of a sudden they stop asking you to do these top tier things, and, you have to kind of either plod along and do what you want in independent land, or you have to
just keep your fledgling company barely alive long enough to where
lick your wounds for a while until you have another genius moment that everybody wants to jump on board with.
Yeah, basically. I mean, that's all McFarlane basically did was
he rode the success of Spider-Man, created Spawn, and by that, all of a sudden people were...
Well, and even Spawn, I remember when it came out, I mean, there was some success to it, but it was not exactly, hoo-yah. And just in general, I mean, Image plodded along, like, fledglingly for quite a long time.
But they like any new business, the startup is always rough, and they got through that awkward phase for a while, primarily carried by Spawn and a couple other things. But then once more people saw that
Spawn is about the only thing.
we can bring our stuff here and we can do our own thing and own the rights to it. That had appeal to it, and so I'm sure that was part of what kept them moving, was the promise of what could have been done.
Yeah, but at the same time, you were having other companies that were doing the same thing kind of fall apart. But I think there was a lot of.
And Savage Dragon would have been the other Image title that helped them out.
Well, you had that. And even though they're not worth pretty much the paper they're printed on today, back in the day, Max and Pitt were pretty popular.
Yeah.
I mean, to be quite honest, those were huge books back then. And to be fair, people wanted to get Brigade and stuff like that. It was so horrid.
But it was also a different mindset of what you wanted back then, the rock star vibe and having everybody look cool and got spikes and chains.
It needed to look like you were getting ready to take the stage with Kiss.
Yeah, pretty much. But with guns.
Yeah.
Ginormous fucking guns.
Oh god. And tiny feet.
But as time has gone on, we've gone from this style to that style, and now we've kind of gotten to this era where it's a giant mixing bowl. And honestly, if you're into chibi or extreme, or if you just want kind of a homespun feel to it, there is a style out there for everybody, and I'm sure you can find it if you look.
It's always kind of been there. It's just, unfortunately, some of these companies go by the wayside during the time. I mean, you lose good companies like, First Comics and Eclipse and all those guys. Comico going away. Absolutely, that's another one. There's so many of them that, went away in the 80s and 90s, but, now we're getting another resurgence of them. I mean, we got like Mad Cave and Archaea, and, there's a bunch of them that are up and coming right now. And hell, one of my friends from high school owns Smoking Gun Comics out of Colorado. So,
you have Action Lab and Go Balls, but
I don't remember O Balls. What did they put out?
I'll show you later what they put out. But yeah, you're right. We're coming into this resurgence, and I think part of it is kind of from, again, the ability to do this with the technology that we have. If you think about YouTube, instead of going out to Hollywood and putting in your time and cutting your teeth, if you put out a couple of strong videos on YouTube, that's enough to generate interest, and then people will come to you. And I think that self-publishing or getting together with your friends and starting your own title, you have that ability anymore, and then you can kind of fake it until you make it.
Yeah, we'll have to see where it heads. I'm kind of curious at this point, but
so long story short, there's something out there for everybody. With Wolverine, I'm obviously going to read it regardless. We didn't start off on the best foot, but it's still better than some of the other mutant titles that they've put out. So it's, I'll call it average.
That works.
All right. On that note, we'll hopefully be back next week. But if weather happens or if we have another delay in shipment, we may not. And I know that
Or
on the
if I
week
can
of
find anything
Christmas,
again.
we probably won't be here.
Yeah.
And if all that's the case, then Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and we'll see you later. Otherwise, we might be back here in a week. All right. On that note, from the Ark, have a good night.